Hi folks, in the previous video what I showed you was how to create a linked list manually. So we effectively made two objects and custom objects, and we connected those custom objects via one of the attributes in the custom object, namely the this.child property. Now you can make linked lists this way just by sort of manually creating the nodes slash custom objects and connecting them together. Um, but there's a more automated way to do it, and that's what I wanted to show you in this video because you're going to want to use it for the assignment. But before we actually sort of dive into the code, let me just show you this demo interface. And this interface should remind you pretty much of the one that you use for the item list. Is just sort of a much more rudimentary version where we can create items, and we're creating an item here, and then we're going to create another. Let me actually run this from the start. Creating an item, and then we're appending another item to that item. And then we can traverse that linked list, effectively sort of show all the items that we've created, A, B, C. And so this functionality should remind you very much of how we created the item list and then showed the item list, or created individual items in the item list and then showed all the items. And in the previous assignment, what you did was you created each object, each custom object or item, and then you pushed them into an array. But in this new assignment, what you're going to be doing is just creating each item and then using an attribute in the item to link them all together into a linked list, and then you traverse the list. So instead of using an array, you use a linked list to perform the same sort of, to accomplish the same sort of functionality. So how do we actually do that? Okay, first of all, you do have, you start off with something, we can just call it a node here. And this you can think of as the equivalent to one of the items in the list. And it has, the attributes in your custom object. Here we're just using this dot value, but you would have attributes like this dot priority and this dot, what are other attributes of the item, this dot prop, I forget what they are, this dot name, this dot priority, and this dot owner, right? And then, so in that sense, the item is not going to really differ. Your custom object is not going to differ, but it's going to include from what it was in the previous assignment, but it's going to include this extra attribute, which is this dot next, which we learned about in the previous video. And that's what we're going to use to, whereas in the previous video we used this dot child, in this case we're using this dot next to connect one custom object to the next custom object. So, and we've already, so how does it actually do that? Well, we have something here, a new sort of function, and we're calling this our linked list function, and we instantiate the linked list here, okay? And that linked list function contains two methods. One is an append method, which allows you to append items to the existing linked list, and then a find tail method, which allows you to find the very end of the linked list so that you know where to actually append the next item that you've created. And let me just show you that visually in a diagram. So if we go back to the learning module and go to this background, and then we click on a single linked list, we can see here a diagram that basically illustrates how a linked list works. And you basically have your custom objects with their standard attributes. In this case, the name of the item, the priority of the item, the owner, and then you have this extra attribute called next, which points to the next object, and you continue on. Okay, so this is sort of a visual representation of a linked list. The problem is when you append, say you want to append item E to this linked list, well, you need to know where to actually append the item. Do you append it to the B node or the C node? No, you need to append it to the very tail or end of the linked list, and that's what this method accomplishes here, is the this.findTail. So when you're going to append a new item, the append method makes use of the findTail method to find the end, and then it'll actually append the method. Append the new custom object you created. So let's just run through this code, or I'll just sort of walk you through this and show you sort of verbally how it works. And also, by the way, I should also mention that if linked lists have tails, or ends of their list, they also have the beginning of the list, which is called the head. Okay, so this terminology is going to be important for you to understand how this linked list code works. So when we created our first object, AAA, and then clicked append to list, you can see that this is a button here, and when you click it, it calls the myList object, right? This is the myList object. It's basically an instantiation of the linked list, and then it calls the append method. And then in this append method, we're actually passing in the node value. That node value is AAA. And then in this first conditional, it's saying, is the head of the linked list empty? And since we're creating the first node of the list, it is. And then in this next line, we're saying assign. We're instantiating the new node. Yeah, basically instantiating this code, and loading AAA into this.value attribute, and then assigning that new custom object AAA to the head of the linked list, and that's all it's doing. Okay, so now we have a linked list with a single item in it, and it's got a head. All right, so now on the second time we typed in BBB, append to list. Again, we call the append method. But this time, when we come to this conditional, is the head null? No, because the head is not null. The first object that we created, AAA, is in the head position. So then we run this code, and we instantiate the new node, BBB, based on this. And then what we do is we find the tail of the linked list, and then we assign the new node to the next attribute of the tail. And what is the tail for BBB? Well, when we instantiated BBB, it's the head. The head and the tail are the same, right? When only AAA is in the linked list, all we have is this item, right, in the linked list. So the head and the tail are the same. But then with CCC, when we append CCC, we run through this code. We instantiate CCC. This time, when we're looking for the tail, it's going to be on the second node, BBB, and that's when we're going to append CCC to the next attribute of the BBB item. Okay, and this find tail method. So how does the find tail method work? Well, when the find tail method is called, it passes in the head node. Then in the find tail method itself, the next attribute of the head node is checked. If the head's node's next attribute is null, it knows the node is also the tail, and that's then the node that is returned to the append method. Otherwise, what the method does is it looks at the next node and the next node and the next node until it arrives at a node where the next attribute is null. And when it arrives at that node with a null next attribute, that's the tail, and that's what's the method returns back to the append method. So that's in brief how this linked list functionality works. And so to actually leverage this code for the assignment, you actually don't really need to change anything in the linked list code. This append method is going to work, and this find tail method are going to work as is. You're not going to have to modify them at all. All you're going to need to do is change your custom function that or the custom item that object that you're passing in. This, you could still call it node if you wanted to, but you're going to have to change the attributes so that they map to the attributes of the custom object slash item that you created in the previous assignment. And then when you traverse the list at the end, or rather when you're going to try to output the linked list, instead of iterating through the array, you have to traverse through the list. And you can see that the way we traverse through the list is we call the instantiated linked list, and we're just calling the find tail method. Now you're not going to be able to call the find tail method because you don't want to modify it, but you'll call something, exploit the same sort of logic, this while logic, to iterate through the linked list to build the HTML and access each of the nodes and the objects and their attributes to create the list of items that you're trying to that you want to output to the bottom of the screen. And that's basically it. One last thing I wanted to show you is just how this same if we run this if we take this JSBin code and actually output it to the real console, we can see a little bit better how that linked list is constructed, or what it looks like in the console. So let's refresh this, and then we're going to do AAA and append to list, and that's outputting the linked list right here. And you can see that linked list right now has only one item in it. It has this AA item, and the next attribute is null. But now when we add BBB and we append a list, now again it's outputting the head of the list, which is AAA. But if we open up AAA and look at next, we see that it's appended the BBB object to it. And if we open up BBB and look at next, we can see that it's null. But now if we append another object, CCC object, to our linked list, and again the head is outputted here, and if we drill down we can see AAA, the next is BBB, and if we open up BBB we can see that the next is CCC, and if we open up CCC we can see that the next is null, which means that CCC is the tail of the list. And that's really, sort of I think the console here helps to really illustrate how that linked list, what that linked list looks like, and how each node is connected to each subsequent node. So I hope that was helpful, and good luck with the assignment.